All right, what's going on, Laker fans? Thank you very much for hanging out. Thank you very much for tuning in on this Sunday evening. A lot going on. Actually, sort of a lot going on. I feel like there's a lot more chatter than there is substance, but I appreciate you guys hanging out. We got a lot to get into. A lot, obviously, has been going on. I'll spend a lot in this episode, actually. We'll definitely talk Lakers basketball, but there's some other moves of some players that we thought might be tied to the Lakers. I think kind of fascinating what's happened with Paul George and the Clippers. We'll spend some time on that. And as you guys can see right here, very, very excited to have Mark Medina joining the show. What's going on, Mark? How are you, brother?
Alan, I'm always great if I get to run into you and talk basketball, Lakers, or NBA at large. So I'm doing great.
I'll take it. I will take it. It's funny. Right before we just started, you and I were talking about. I was mentioning. I'm like, what do you think? Action? Not really that much action. What can you give me your thoughts? And I know we're only a few hours into. You could call it 5 hours into free agency, but you said something that I thought was very interesting. You said that the NBA with these different aprons that they have is actually. It feels like it's stopping a lot of deals and it's making teams go cheap. Can you expand on that a little bit? I think that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, well, prior to all the second apron concerns, since I think last season, the NBA, in an effort to try to bring more parity, competitive balance, they had salary cap numbers that they always release every season. And if you ever surpass that number, you're then vulnerable to a luxury tax. And what you saw is that the good owners and the competitive owners and the wealthy owners, they knew, you know what, that's the cost of doing business, even if it's more punitive. And I think, in a way to rein in that spending and try to address any division between big, small markets or the wealth of certain owners, is that now they instituted the second apron where, if you cross right now, the number is 188 million. All of a sudden, your taxpayer mid-level exception and your non-taxpayer mid-level exception is a difference between $7 million. And so, as a
Hmm.
result, you're having organizations make decisions that have to do with financials, even if that owner is willing to spend money. Because if you cross that apron, you literally can't build a good competitive roster around the rest of your one or two star players. So, as we saw this first night of free agency, Paul George officially making it clear that he's not going to be with the Clippers. That's, I think, part one of potentially many casualties. The fact that
Hmm.
a difference between a 3 year offer and a 4 year offer created that division of his decision to leave or not is his decision. But the fact that the Clippers drew such a firm line in the sand went beyond any evaluation of injury concerns or basketball concerns, or optimism. It really had to do with all those financial parts. And that wouldn't be the Clippers, because Steve Ballmer, he's very wealthy.
Sure.
He'd be willing to spend.
Yeah, it's and I think the Paul George thing, and as we get to PG, I'd love to get your thoughts on the intricacies there. But I think overall, so is it safe to say this? Is it safe to say on the way the NBA is right now? Obviously, their goal is parity. Their goal is the more teams that they can have compete, whether you're in a big market or a small market. Obviously, a lot of people that tune into this channel, a lot of them are Laker fans. Do you think that even though this is complicated, even though there's a lot of layers to it that for me, I start getting a migraine trying to think about it. Do you think it's ultimately good for the league or not that they have this many or they have this many obstacles?
It's a tough conversation to be had, because this is the same conversation that the NBA and the Players Union had that led to the 2011 lockout. But it's just the
Hmm.
ongoing theme of it. And so I think when you look at these last few years, basically since the Warriors dynasty ended, there hasn't been a repeat champion. Now, I think that's something that the NBA wants. It's similar to the NFL, where
Sure.
every team has a chance. You want parity top to bottom. But I think one of the consequences is that is that you're not rewarding excellence and you're not allowing a team to have tools to try to defend its
Mm.
championship. I mean, we saw that with the Denver Nuggets with making decisions with not retaining some of their key role players last year, and I think you can make an argument that was a
That was the difference.
significant reason why they lost the Minnesota Timberwolves in the playoffs. Another reason why they lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope just tonight, going to the Orlando Magic. So yeah, there's a lot of in the weeds things that owners and the players union have to sort out. So there's not one definitive answer, but I think the bottom line is you want parity and competition, but you also want compelling basketball. And so while I think it is good that every team has a chance, you look at the NBA Finals this season, two deserving
Mm.
teams with the Boston Celtics and Dallas Mavericks, but the games themselves weren't competitive. You want competitions, but there's no easy answers, and there's a reason why there's a lot of meetings that go back and forth with this.
If you're just hanging out right now, appreciate you guys hanging out. If you guys don't mind, greatly appreciate if you guys can subscribe to the channel. Okay. Right as we got started, I'm going to kind of lead off with this one. And I know it's not the sexiest name out there, but I do think it's a move to be talked about for the Los Angeles Lakers. So earlier today, it was announced that Max Christie, who was a restricted free agent, intends to sign a 4-year, $32 million deal. I think the deal does include a player option. It's funny because I think by reading this right here and talking about Max Christie, I think there'd be a lot of Laker fans like, okay, cool, but are we going to get Klay Thompson? What's going to happen? Are they going to trade for Jerami Grant? Is Brook Lopez available? You kind of go down the list, and we'll get into some of that stuff. But Max Christie, to me, was a player that unfortunately we didn't really get that much of an opportunity to watch last year. And I do believe under JJ Redick and a new coaching staff and a commitment by the Lakers to give him a 4-year deal, I think we're going to see a lot more Max Christie in the near future. So I just want to get your thoughts on the deal that Max Christie got, and what do you think this is signaling from the Lakers of what kind of player that the Lakers value in regards to what he'll be this upcoming year and years to come?
Well, none of this was surprising. I think that it was very intentional that when you watch JJ Redick's introductory press conference,
Mm.
Rob Pelinka named certain players besides LeBron James and Anthony Davis by name. Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, Max Christie. Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura, they were free agents last year. They're under contract, but I think that signaled that unless there's this blockbuster deal that's too good to pass up, they're staying put. What message is sent about Max Christie was they're going to retain him, and a lot of it's low hanging fruit. He's a young player, so it's an attractive contract, 4 years, $32 million. He would have been a restricted free agent, and while the Lakers could have matched any offer that would have gone his way, there is the danger that he gets a bigger offer than that, and that hamstrings them a little bit. And I think because of those financial resources, it basically guarantees that he's going to have a bigger role this season. But I think, in fairness to Max Christie, he should have had a bigger role last season. But
I agree.
Different head coach with Darvin Ham. They also had some veteran players that the front office wound up signing with Gabe Vincent and getting Spencer Dinwiddie off in the buyout market. And I think you understand they wanted to add depth the previous offseason and getting Gabe Vincent. But once it was clear that he was going to be having injury issues, I thought that Max Christie would be having a lot of playing time. But that all changed once Spencer Dinwiddie joined the team. I understand why they got him. He was a cheap buyout option candidate, but he wound up basically eating the majority of Max Christie's playing time, so much that he wasn't even a factor at all in the postseason. So I think just by default, because JJ Redick is going to try to do new things and he's going to try to really tap into player development, his role is going to increase. But I think when you look at Max Christie's play, he has all the tools to be a great defender, great finisher, great shooter. He's just scratching the surface.
Yeah, it's funny, Mark. I'm with you, and I think a lot of Laker fans, and you don't really hear this too often, but I think a lot of Laker fans last year were like, why don't you use Max Christie? Like, what's the downside of using Max Christie? There are games where it felt like the Lakers could have used a jolt or some youth or something along those lines. Just your personal opinion. What do you think of his game? What do you think of his game, and how much do you think he can help next year?
I love his game. I think he was someone that should have gotten a lot more reps last season, and you never equate summer league performances to actual NBA
Sure.
regular season performances. But seeing him in summer league, you could tell that he was like about the right stuff as far as his
Mm.
work ethic and just what his potential could be with his skill set. I think the MO that the Lakers always talk about him is he's a guy that can be a really good two-way player, and he improved as a finisher last offseason. So I expect that with more reps and under JJ Redick's leadership, that we'll be able to see him tap into that growth a little bit.
All right, so if you're out there right now, and I'll read some of these comments a little bit later. If you got some thoughts, you're a Laker fan out there on Max Christie signing a 4-year deal worth $32 million. I'm happy he signed the deal. It sounds like in today's NBA, with some of those numbers being out there, that's going to be a deal we probably look at in a couple of years and say he's only making $8 million a year, right? That's I'm sure there's going to be a lot of advantages to that. There is a player option in there. So I'm sure if Max Christie is balling out, he'll get an opportunity for another contract. But okay, that's the first one off the board. Like I said, it's not the sexiest thing out there, but it is something that the Lakers did do early into free agency today. The name that we keep hearing, and this kind of started the conversation yesterday. So yesterday we know that LeBron opted out of his contract, and part of the idea and the concept was if the Lakers can find the right person, he may take a little less money to help the Lakers sign a player with that full mid-level exception that they could potentially have. So the name that I think has been around the most is Klay Thompson. That's a name that I think we've been hearing the most. The start of, I think when that story first came out, Jonas Valanciunas' name was out there. He just signed a deal with the Wizards, so he's off the board. James Harden, which I never really felt like that was going to be something, he signed a 2-year, $70 million deal with the Clippers. He's off the board. I just want to get your thoughts, and I know we're a little bit all over the place when it comes to Klay Thompson because I'm sure there's going to be a number of teams that have interest in him. He does have ties to Los Angeles, of course. You and I know his dad really well. I did the pregame show and continue to do the Lakers broadcast with Michael Thompson. How do you kind of view this Klay Thompson scenario and looking at teams like the Dallas Mavericks, looking at teams like the Los Angeles Lakers? I've heard Philly's name thrown into the mix here. What do you think is the best fit for Klay Thompson with any of these teams that you feel like are realistic?
Well, I think it's going to come down to the Lakers and the Mavericks. All signs are pointing to that the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be getting Paul George. And, they prioritize that from both carving out cap space as well as just looking at their depth chart that they wanted to have a two-way wing player to complement Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. Now, as far as best fit for Klay Thompson with the Dallas Mavericks or the Lakers, I don't think you can go wrong here. Obviously, we know that Klay is a great outside shooter. He's not the same defender as he was, pre-ACL injury in 2019, but he's a willing defender. I think the question now is which team has the best assets. And Laker fans probably not going to like to hear this, but the Dallas Mavericks do. When you're looking at the Lakers specifically, one wrinkle to keep an eye on with D'Angelo Russell exercising his player option, inevitably, both from a skill and a cap perspective, he would be a pretty attractive asset to dangle. But I don't think the fact that that he and the Warriors had a partnership together is actually a good thing. They already have perspective on what it was like to have D'Angelo Russell with them. And that was one of the reasons why they got D'Angelo the first time, because they knew that Klay Thompson was going to be out for basically the entire season. So this was kind of a stopgap measure. And even though some of their evaluation got hindered because Steph Curry got injured 4 games into the season, their conclusion was probably what the same conclusion that Laker fans have become accustomed to. Great shooter, great playmaker, but inconsistent. And while he has shown flashes of improvement on defense, he's not going to fulfill any positional needs on that end of the floor. And so I don't think that the Warriors are going to be interested in that kind of reunion. So I think that they're going to look at what can they get from Dallas's end. And, to Dallas's credit, with exception to last season, it was always about Luka, no one else. Now they actually have a pretty good net of supporting cast characters that they can use in deals.
Yeah, I saw this a little bit earlier. So Bobby Marks had put out this tweet, and this just actually kind of goes to some of the different options that Klay Thompson is going to have. So the Mavs have a $16.1 million trade exception created when they traded Tim Hardaway Jr. The Lakers and the Clippers would have a 12.8 non-tax mid-level unless a sign and trade, like you mentioned. And the Sixers could actually have $14 million in room if Paul George signs with them. So they could be strategic here in figuring that out. And I know those are 4 options there. I know a lot of people are looking out there and just trying to see, well, what is this about? Within the last hour or so, or no, actually within the last 30 minutes or so, there was I'm trying to find it right here, the Naj Marshall signing. A lot of people say, oh, well, Dallas, since they just signed Naj Marshall, does that then does that all of a sudden stop them from being able to pursue Klay Thompson? The answer is no. It doesn't stop them from being able to pursue Klay Thompson, and they still can. So there's a lot of suitors that are out there. I'm just going to speak of it from a Laker perspective here real quick. And I think, Mark, let's see what happens. There's a lot that can come into play. I look at Klay Thompson, and at this stage of his career, if I know LeBron's walking into his 22nd season, but I think one of the things that Klay really hasn't had these last couple of years is having real big men behind him that can help him on the defensive side, where he could just – it's not all on the shoulders of Klay Thompson or not all on the shoulders. Draymond Green is an incredible defender. He's been awesome. He's been fantastic. But Draymond's not a big. I feel like he would get such unbelievable looks with the Lakers because LeBron and Anthony Davis are on the team. And then I think defensively – there are players on this Lakers team that can help Klay. That it's not just, if whoever Klay is guarding, if they get past him, well, now you got to worry about if these guys are still on the team. There's Vando, there's Rui, there's Anthony Davis. There's other good size that I think was really actually hurting the Golden State Warriors these last couple of years. They just didn't have enough size. And maybe I'm just speaking of this more selfishly, and maybe I'm just looking at it from purple and gold sunglasses, but I love the fit with Klay Thompson potentially as a Laker. And I feel like for Klay's game, he can also do really well with the Lakers. Am I looking at it too much from a Laker lens, or do you see where I'm coming from on that?
No, I think the fit is great. I mean, obviously, Michael Thompson would love it. I think it would mean obviously a lot to Klay because he's often recalled to me and others going to Staples Center when he was younger and hanging out with his dad and being introduced to Kobe during the 2004 NBA Finals. But I think, with giving some perspective with the Warriors, I think in fairness, when he came back from his Achilles injury, I mean, that first season, the 2021-22 season, that was, just kind of the gap season with getting his condition underneath him. But even with that season, when they won the championship, one of the reasons why it still worked was Andrew Wiggins was a great two-way player that could basically take that defensive wing position role. And last season, we did not see that happen because he just was not the same player that he was when the Warriors were winning the championships. He had some notable absences with injuries. And then Klay was going through, I think, some frustrations with, accepting a bench role. He eventually did thrive and embrace it, but that was a huge adjustment just knowing how he was such an integral part during those Warriors championship runs. But I think when you're looking at the Lakers, no doubt he'll still check the box shooting wise. I do think that you hit on a good point that they do have, even though the Warriors had Draymond Green and Kevon Looney, the Lakers have really great interior defenders where he doesn't have to be the main
Hmm.
point of attack defender. But I think that we have to he'll have to just accept the reality and be understanding that while he can still be a productive player, I think any notion that he can suddenly return to pre-injury Klay, that's out the window. Like we've already had enough data to show that even though he can be a great player, he's just never going to be the same player. So how can he still be successful as well as adaptable if he has to adjust his role as far as playing time, starting, coming off the bench, being with different lineups? But I think from a fit standpoint, the Lakers need a lot of shooting, and obviously Klay provides
Sure.
that.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think you're right, and I'm sure it's kind of a tough pill for him to swallow. But you are right. Listen, it's not the same Klay Thompson. And by the way, if it was the same Klay Thompson, the Golden State Warriors would have offered him a different contract. They would have, and it's kind of interesting because I think it was last year, right? He got the 2 years, 48 million was the deal that they offered, and clearly it seems like that's not the type of money that he's going to get in the market. I think you're right that he's not the same player, but the amount of money that it's going to cost you now potentially to get him, I think that money, based on what he still has left, there's value in a 14, 15, $16 million Klay Thompson rather than a $30 million Klay Thompson.
Oh, without a doubt. And, I'm eager to get answers to some of these questions, and I'm sure others will. Is that while I think we all understand the NBA is a business and it
Mm,
operates both ways from both the Warriors standpoint and Klay, there is a certain amount of irony here that Klay is very likely going to be joining a team with on less money than what the Warriors offered them, even though that was a vast discount from what they gave him with that max contract in 2019, almost a month after he tore his ACL. But with the NBA and the way the business operates, uh, some sort of business thing that rubs a player the wrong way, it can wind up compounding into other issues that all of a sudden the crux of the issue is no longer relevant to the topic at hand. But I am curious to get more clarity on the thought process on how it got to this point.
About an hour ago, Woj had was on NBA Today. Maybe he was on SportsCenter, but it was on ESPN. He said, "I'm told LeBron James called Klay Thompson right when free agency opened. These conversations, this negotiation will go into tomorrow. There probably will not be a resolution tonight." So that was a little bit earlier. I know it's just a complete guess, and your guess is better than mine. When the dust settles, where do you think Klay is?
Yeah, that's that. I don't have an answer to that because it's tough. If I could make predictions in this business, I'd be going to Vegas for reasons beyond covering summer league and USA basketball, if you know what I mean. I think the other thing is that we're talking about sign and trade scenarios, and I think that the Warriors, they ideally would like to be able to do that so they get something in
Sure,
return, especially
sure.
because they weren't able to get a deal with Paul George from the Clippers, and they waived Chris Paul and got nothing in return. But Klay Thompson's under no obligation to make that happen. I mean, it
That's
it,
right.
it would be in his interest to do that if he wants to be able to make as much money as he possibly can. But with him being a free agent, he can do the mid level and choose whatever team he wants. And so I again am curious, what is the wrinkle here? Is he looking at best fit role or the contract or a mix of both? I think because of how Klay is and what the Lakers and Mavericks situations are, I think you can make a case for both teams as far as what the best option is. But I think back to my earlier point, the only reason why I thought the Mavs were in a better position was from a pure sign and trade standpoint. I wouldn't be surprised the Warriors would feel like what they had to offer was a lot more enticing what the Lakers could offer.
It's going to be fascinating, and I'm with. And listen, he is a tough prediction, and I do think deep down in Klay's blood, he's going to go where he feels like I got a shot to win. I'm sure for him, the money's going to be pretty comparable. Maybe it's a few $1 million difference, unless it is a bigger sign and trade. He can get a lot more money. I don't know what the market is or what that's going to look like, but I can see Klay, little of this being personal too. I'm leaving the Golden State Warriors. I feel like I was disrespected with the Golden State Warriors. I helped deliver 4 championships. I was part of a dynasty. I'm going to another team in the West, and I'm going to try to win. And I think that's kind of and listen, maybe he ends up with a team in the East, but no matter where he ends up, I think the team he ends up, he feels, put the business to the side for a quick second. I got a shot at winning. And the only other thing I'll say about the Dallas spot, and listen, if he ended up with Dallas, I would be bitter, but I get it if that's where he ends up. The other part about Dallas is not only can they offer more money with the mid-level exception of just where both teams are right now, no state tax in Dallas as well. I wonder how much, or in Texas. So I wonder how much that can come into play. There are some advantages on both sides. And if the dust settled and he ended up in Dallas, I wouldn't be shocked either.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked there, but then again, I go back to I wouldn't be shocked he's with the Lakers. I mean, obviously Michael Thompson has wanted this for a while now, but I do
Yeah.
remember covering the Warriors when, ironically enough, the Warriors were playing the Lakers at Oracle Arena in Oakland. Yet there was a very loud section of Laker fans in the stands
Mm.
yelling, "We want Thompson," during that 2018-19 season when he was going to be a free agent. And while he didn't obviously listen to those pleas, he wound up signing a max deal with the Warriors. He did acknowledge when I asked him about it afterwards that it really feels nice to be wanted. And, even though his playoff performances didn't live up to what he imagined in his mind, the moment itself of having that chance to play against the Lakers in that arena that he grew up going to
Mm.
as a kid, that was like a dream come true. He was having pinch me moments during that time. So you can't dismiss that history and what it means to him.
Well, and a player like him, and look at the Lakers of just, obvious needs. Klay Thompson is an obvious need, period. Like that is an obvious. He's still, even whatever last year, however you want to look at last year. I know Klay had moments where he struggled, still shot, I think it was 39% from three. The type of looks that he can get with some of the players that are on this team. I think I mentioned to you, I think defensively, Lakers are just a much bigger, well-rounded defensive team. Good length. You got Anthony Davis. I think he could fit really well. It's going to be interesting to see what decision he makes. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Of course, my guest right now is Mark Medina. Does a incredible job covering the NBA, the Lakers, the Clippers. I mean, really everything NBA related. So I'm really excited to have him on and getting his insight. Mark, as we continue to roll here, I'm going to just kind of go through some of the different rumors that were associated today. And then I got a couple NBA stuff I want to get into as well. A little bit earlier, I saw this. There was a report out there that the Lakers are trying to trade for Jerami Grant. Jerami Grant, been in the league for a long time, obviously a part of the Portland Trailblazers right now. I think averaging, if these numbers are right here, 21 points a game, about 45% from the field and close to 40% from three, 42% from catch and shoot threes. It's so unique. I think there's certain teams that, I don't think the Lakers consider the Portland Trailblazers as their rival, but I think the Blazers probably don't like the Lakers. I think you could look at that with the Suns. There's teams that are just kind of in that Laker Western Conference or Pacific Division, even though we don't really look at the Pacific Division anymore. Is that viable? Do you think a trade like that can happen between these two teams? And do you think Jerami Grant is the type of player that the Lakers should target?
He's he's a good player, but he's not a game changer. I mean, if I'm LeBron James, even though they have the same representation, that move is not a move that warrants taking a pay cut. Ironically, Jerami Grant signing last summer, was the move that was the tipping point that led to Damian Lillard telling the Blazers, you know what, trade me, I'm out. Like, this is your big offseason move. I think the Lakers would deserve just as much scrutiny if that's their big move. Again, Jerami Grant, great player, but as far as that being their major offseason move, I don't think that does anything really significantly. Again, it's nice. It adds roster depth, but you got to ask the question, what are the Lakers giving up? But I think really what comes down to is that it's either got to be Klay Thompson or DeMar DeRozan. And I know that as we speak, other names got off the board, but unless it's those two players, if I'm
Hmm.
LeBron, what's the point in taking a pay cut?
Yeah, it's interesting with Jerami Grant because he's still got a lot of money left on his contract. I don't mind him as a player. I think my bigger concern with Jerami Grant, he's been on such bad teams over the last 4 or 5 years, probably 5 years now. I don't know if he, remembers real competitive basketball. That would be such an adjustment for him to just get back into the mix where there are expectations, where there are mics in front of your face saying, "Yeah, that performance is just not good enough." I like him as a player. I see what you're saying too. I see what you're saying that, hey, this is a guy that I mean, the only way they're going to get him, it's going to have to be a trade anyway. So you're talking D'Angelo's got to go, probably another piece as well, because you got to match that contract. I think he's making close to 35 million a year. So it's not like the man isn't making money. But think about his last couple of stops. He was in Detroit and he was in Portland. I don't know when the last time he's played a significant game. I'm a fan of his game, but I understand your hesitation to a player like that. And that is interesting on the LeBron side of it. If I'm giving money back, is that the player that you think is the right player to give money back for?
Yeah, and this all ties again together to Damian Lillard last offseason. The fact that they spent so many resources to get Jerami Grant, and that tied up the ability to round out the rest of the roster. That gave him the ultimate red flag. And to make this trade work because of that contract, the Lakers are going to have to give up significant assets. So it's a much different conversation than if he was available as a free agent and you're getting him at a mid level or even less than that, and you think, okay, yeah, he's a nice piece.
Hmm.
But again, by contract itself, this is the significant move. And again, if I'm LeBron, I don't view that as an impact move. I view that as a, well, that was nice, but I'm now going to keep my max deal.
Keeping it moving here, a couple other players that we heard some rumors to a little bit earlier today. What do you make of the fit potentially of Brook Lopez to the Lakers?
Yeah, I like him a lot. I mean, obviously, Laker fans are very familiar with his game because he played a few years ago. Obviously, much different context, but his skill set is the same. You know, he is a stretch five. He's a great post up player. He has an outside shot, great defender. Obviously, Anthony Davis fulfills a lot of the things that
Big
Brook
time.
Lopez does, but
Hmm.
this saves AD from playing his most hated position at the five. He can play at the four, and I think that even in today's NBA, because both bigs are very versatile, they can really mix and match and throw teams off that way. But I think the biggest thing is you have another player that can really complement AD in the front court defense. That would be one tough team to be able to get past against at the rim.
Mark, it's interesting because we've talked about a couple of different players, and they're all different positions. Klay Thompson is, you're typically going to use him as a shooting guard. Jerami Grant is your wing small forward. Brook Lopez is a five. He's your center. Without a name, is there a play? Is there a priority you think in position that you'd like to see the? Hey, okay, if they got to, when the dust settles, it's most important to have this type of player. Again, not a name of a player, but just the position that you think is most needed.
No, not necessarily. I think with free agency, it was about getting best talent available and then also making sure that it's not diluting too much of your roster depth. So if I had to prioritize, as far as who the Lakers' best interest would be to get, it would be Klay, and if not, it would be DeMar. And I know that people bring up concerns about, hey, well, DeMar is a mid-range guy and he could shrink the floor a little bit, but I think the underrated part about DeMar DeRozan and is he plays team basketball really well and knows how to
Hmm.
be efficient. So even though his bread and butter is mid-range isolation, he doesn't clog things up because he knows how to play team ball. And so with that, I think that he could fit in really well with LeBron James and Anthony Davis and adjust, the way he scores, even though his role would obviously be different, being presumably the third option.
Yeah, it's funny, man. These names, the Zach Levines, the DeMar DeRozans, um, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young. So many of the same names have been tied to the Lakers. And I remember DeMar DeRozan, I mean, heck, it was a couple of years ago. Was it Magic that came out and said that DeRozan's agent had said that he wanted to come to the Lakers and whatever? It didn't work out. But even DeRozan, and I'm not watching many Chicago Bulls games at this stage, but 34 years old, obviously would be in that win now mode, similar to Klay Thompson, win now mode. And whatever that roster looks like probably would look a lot different once LeBron leaves. I'm sure whatever names of players that we're talking about now would be leaving too.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, the Bulls, they had a lot of issues last season. I mean, most notably, it was injuries to Zach LaVine and Lonzo Ball. But DeMar DeRozan has been a source of consistency, positive locker room presence. So I think he would fit right in. It's just a matter of, his salary numbers can be presumably a lot different than it was before. I mean, I believe last season he was making around 28.5 million. I would suspect because of all what we're talking about the Lakers payroll and everything, will be a little bit down, but that goes into what we're talking about with LeBron and his consideration of taking at least some relative pay cut to make that all work.
I'm going to throw one of these on here. We got a super. By the way, if you guys want to be a part of the show, you can feel free to throw your comments. A little tough right now to read all these comments, but Glenn here's got a quick question. Great show. Who do you think will be JJ's assistants? Mark, any thoughts? I mean, we really haven't got much information on that, and I know how important that's going to be. Is there a name or two that you think when the dust settles going to be part of that Lakers staff?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of information vacuum, but just using educated guesses here, I would think that Stan Van Gundy would be his lead assistant. I mean, he checks two boxes. He has NBA head coaching experience, and he had experience coaching JJ Redick when they were in Orlando together. So there's a relationship. So I think that would be a no-brainer. Scott Brooks, I think, as well. He obviously had a lot of success as a head coach in Oklahoma City and Washington. He was an assistant coach in Portland last year. And while, Portland's been a hot mess ever since trading Damian Lillard, you can't really put that on an assistant coach. I think the bottom line is he's embraced the fact that even though he was previously a head coach, of being an assistant coach and helping out a young head coach. And so those would be my two favorites. And then as far as like players that are more on the player development side, I would think Jared Dudley would be candidate number one and Rajon Rondo would be candidate number two. But I think the thing that's been emphasized to me, and it's been out there through other reporters too, is that the Lakers don't just want a coaching staff that is very heavy on experience to mitigate JJ Redick's inexperience, whether it's player development coaches or veteran assistant coaches. They all want all those candidates to be able to help with player development, because when we're talking about all these cap limitations because of the second apron, for better and for worse, one of the things the Lakers are pragmatically leaning in on is that trying to improve from within and really accelerate the development of their young guys because of how limited they feel with being able to sign guys and make moves. And so it's really important that the experienced voices as well as the young voices really collaborate together to be able to help develop players as quickly as possible.
Lakers got a lot of work to do. That's what I think you just said.
Yeah, I see someone. I was going to say I saw another KCJ24. They mentioned Dwayne Casey. I think he would be another great veteran voice as well.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because you look at this and where we're sitting right now, you see the Lakers trying to figure out their assistant coaches, like you mentioned. They're trying to figure out what they can do, obviously, in free agency and what players that they can add. LeBron going into his 20s. There's so many things to kind of juggle right now for the Lakers, but they have to figure it out. And let's just say nobody's going to feel sorry for them. This is the NBA. This is the Western Conference, and that part of it I think makes it very, very exciting as well. Okay, so the one that we kind of started the show with, and I'm going to flip here and go to the NBA for a quick second. Mark, it's so crazy, man. I go back and I saw a lot of people kind of tweeting this stuff out over these last couple of hours. The news came out a little bit earlier today. It was actually the Clippers that put it out in a statement that Paul has informed us that he is signing his next contract with another team. Paul's a tremendous talent, elite two-way player. It goes on to say, we traded a lot to pair Paul and Kawhi Leonard. In exchange, we had 5 seasons of contention. Even though we fell short of our ultimate objective, we appreciate the chances we had with Paul. So, Paul George leaving the Los Angeles Clippers. Where he ends up, he ends up. But some of the videos that were out there, that kind of takes me back. Remember, we had that moment where Kawhi Leonard was making a decision between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Los Angeles Clippers. And we got to a point where it basically came down to Kawhi Leonard was going to sign with the Clippers if they could find a way to get Paul George from the Oklahoma City Thunder. And they gave up, I think it was 5 picks. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, some pick swaps were in the mix there. Right after the deal went down, I think it was Patrick Beverley somewhere. It might have been in Vegas, something like that, with Lou Williams, and they're posting a video, and all of a sudden, all the attention went to the Clippers. And if I told you 5 years would go by and they never made it to an NBA Finals, how do you look at a franchise like the Clippers, who obviously had never been to the Finals before as well, did get to the furthest they've ever got to by getting to the Western Conference Finals? That was with PG, and Kawhi Leonard was injured. When the dust settles, how do you remember this time for the Clippers with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George?
Alan, it's a really great question. I think of 2 things, and they're somewhat contradictory, but they're both valid. No doubt, there's no way to dispute that this deal blew up in their face because they have 0 championships to show for. And you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder with how they've really developed Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and have made use of those good draft picks. But I don't fault the Clippers whatsoever for doing what they did, because think of the context. Kawhi Leonard's coming off a championship season with Toronto, at that point showing some evidence that load management works. The other reality is that with getting Kawhi Leonard and trading for him, in order to do that, you would have to get Paul George. If they didn't trade to get Paul George, Kawhi Leonard's not walking through that door. They were indirectly a package deal. Now, some of it's uncontrollable. The injuries, even though they anticipated that would be something that they would have to manage, I don't think that they envisioned it would be that severe, where every single season something happened. And I think the Clippers, to their credit, would always try to be proactive with trying to get roster depth, a lot of good wing players, just to offset the reality that they have to have a good supporting cast so that not everything is just banked on those 2 players. But I think it's inevitable, especially because we're doing a segment where Laker fans are watching. There's certainly a lot of Schadenfreude. I'm mispronouncing that German word here. But I think one of the things that some people outside of the LA market didn't quite understand was, why would the Clippers always get dunked on when things wouldn't go right, or why Laker fans would mock them. And I truly think, being around the area, knowing how things are, is that the Clippers did themselves disservice with doing all these marketing campaigns with subliminal shots at the Lakers, the street lights over spotlights, the Pat Beverly on court trash talking with LeBron, like all that extra energy, I think made Laker fans think like, who the F do you think you are? Like, you've never done anything. And then anytime things didn't go their way, there was an extra source of glee. Even though Laker fans, they're devoted to the Lakers. They want them to win. I think if those things didn't happen, there wouldn't have been as much of gleeful energy and kick themselves while they're down kind of attitude when things didn't go well.
I think these comments, I think probably
And Duke of Earl said it well. The F the Clippers, they thought they were taking over LA. Never.
Clippers finally out of the crypto arena. Yes, finally out of the Lakers. I'm with you. I listen. I do think that there's at the end of the day, they made that trade to win a championship. They failed and couldn't even get to the NBA Finals. And listen, we could say whatever we want about it. I don't think there was a general manager out there that probably was not making that move. If they knew that, listen, if we get Paul George, we're going to get Kawhi Leonard as well. So I understand. I don't think anybody should question that they did the move, but it failed in the sense, like you mentioned, at the end result, you're not going to remember that team. You're not going to remember that time for the Clippers and say, oh my gosh, that was unbelievable successful. I love what you just said about the Thunder. What you may remember is that Thunder team could be knocking on the door for the next 5 years easy with Shea as one of the best players in the NBA and obviously all these draft picks that they continue to make wise picks and develop in the process. So that part's impressive. Is this a foregone conclusion? Paul George ends up with the Sixers, or do you think there's another scenario out there?
I can't think of another scenario because the other scenario was the Orlando Magic, but they've already made some significant moves. KCP, one of them, where it seems like they've already done their due diligence and thinking, well, we're probably out of the PG sweepstakes. Let's just start concentrating elsewhere. So I guess in today's NBA, you never say never, but it
Yeah.
just seems like the writing is on the wall that he's going to be with the Sixers.
All right, we'll see that how that eventually pans out. I'm curious, Mark, with the rest of the NBA, if you got some thoughts. CP3, not a Los Angeles Lakers, going to the San Antonio Spurs. The KCP one to the Orlando Magic. I think if you're a fan of any team here in the Western Conference, you mentioned a little bit earlier that probably the main reason why the Denver Nuggets weren't able to get back to the finals this year was because they did lose their depth. Bruce Brown and Jeff Green were big pieces for them the year that they beat the Lakers to get to the NBA Finals and then eventually win it all. Now they're losing KCP. What do you make of the Western Conference here over really just, I'll use today as an example. KCP gone. Who else am I missing? Oh, and Paul George leaving the Clippers. What do you make of a couple of these other NBA pieces leaving?
Yeah, well, Chris Paul going to the Spurs, I think it's a great move. He can obviously help mentor Victor Wembanyama, and that was one of the offseason priorities that the Spurs had with making it more veteran-laden, and there just seems to be inevitable parallels to what Chris Paul did with Oklahoma City when Houston traded him there, that he really helped lay down the foundation with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and some of the other young players to get to that next level. It seemed inevitable that Chris Paul's time with the Warriors were up. In fairness, even though he played a much more limited role, the Warriors will be the first to tell you that they really felt like he embraced coming off the bench. He was still effective, even though not the same kind of presence that he had during his prime years. But just from a cap standpoint, he was going to be gone. James Harden coming back to the Clippers. I think some people are wondering, well, why would the Clippers re-sign Harden but not keep Paul George? We have to keep the distinction here in mind. James Harden is coming back on 2 years. They offered Paul George to come back on 3 years, and he said no. He wanted 4 years, but because of those second apron concerns, the Clippers said no. So I think from James Harden, it's one of those things that you want to have something instead of nothing. And two, through all the ups and downs, they were mostly pleased with how James Harden played last season with, embracing his role, trying to, change any issues that the Sixers had as far as his attitude, as well as the Nets with his hasty exits there. And even though there were some initial growing pains, the Clippers were lauded him a lot with how he adjusted his role and embraced it. And the fact of the matter is, he came into training camp, or not training camp, the beginning of the season, once he got traded, trying to almost sacrifice too much. It got to the point where Ty Lue said, no, we want you to have the ball in your hands and look for your shot and be what you normally be. And that really helped empower James Harden. So he played really well. It makes sense that they kept him because it was a good salary number. Then KCP, it's so ironic because he
Mm.
is ultimately what any modern NBA team wants in a player. I think the problem is he's also the ultimate casualty in today's NBA because of all these salary cap concerns. So the Lakers very know well that he is a role player that you want on a championship team because he can defend it at a high level. He's improved as a shooter. The Denver Nuggets knew that well, but when it comes to making tough financial decisions, it's those players that are the casualties because they're not going to be breaking up, their main championship core with Jokic and Murray and Michael Porter Jr. But with Orlando, much different scenario. They have a young team and they had cap space, and so they made good use of that cap space.
Mark, I think from this point on, I'll just keep hitting refresh on Twitter, see if anything goes down, because I think that's usually how it works this time of the year. Excellent stuff, brother. I mean, I know we covered a number of different items, and for those that have been hanging out for 50 minutes or so, I greatly appreciate it. I think what happens and how the dust is going to settle, it feels like a lot of people are saying things will happen sooner than later because guys like LeBron James will eventually want to sign a contract before he heads out for the Olympics. And, obviously Paul George might be the initial domino. Whatever happens after that, all the other dominoes will fall. So I think we're going to get some good answers on what happens to the Lakers and the rest of the NBA. But, Mark, I really, really appreciate you taking the time and hanging out. For all those that hung out during the broadcast, we had over 1,000 people that were live, which is amazing. So thank you very much for doing so. If this is first time on the channel or you've been hanging out for years, please subscribe to the channel. We'll greatly appreciate it. And make sure you follow Mark Medina on all platforms. Mark, thank you very much for the time, bud.
Alan, thanks so much for the time as well. Always good talking NBA, and I'm sure we'll be talking more NBA this week with free agency, as well as the fact that the Lakers are going to be introducing their draft picks with Dalton Connect and Bronny James on Tuesday.
It's coming up on Tuesday. I know you're going to be there. I will be back on tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. I'll be doing my radio show, and I'll also be live streaming it here on YouTube. And then, of course, I got the show with Travis Rogers tomorrow morning as well. Thank you, Laker fans, NBA fans. Appreciate you hanging out. Thank you, Mr. Mark Medina. Hope you guys all have a great rest of your Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you as well.